Copenhagen. This is a beautiful city. I remember I visited a long time ago, really a long time ago. Gosh, I'm old. Anyways, the game is inspired by Copenhagen. In this game, we will be collecting game pieces that are reminiscent of Tetris pieces in terms of shape and color, and we're gonna place them on our personal board, try to build the facades of some of the most beautiful buildings in Copenhagen, and we're gonna do so in a way that hopefully will give us a lot of points. The game is available in two versions: the standard versions that has building tiles made of thick, sturdy cardboard, and then you have the deluxe box, which I'm lucky enough to have here, which has acrylic pieces. The pieces that will form the facades of the buildings are made of acrylic, which has the non-inconceivable distinction of letting you see through the windows. It's really a nice effect here. And then these pieces are just such high quality. They're also shinier and more colorful than the game pieces in the standard edition. Really nice. So what do we have here? Yes, we have a nice stack of game pieces that we will place on our personal board during the game. They are in different colors. Then you have these one square game pieces that are available only when you get certain special benefits in the game. Each player has a board such as this one where they will place the game pieces, and you have to build from the top, from the bottom to the top. So every time you have a new game piece, it needs to be sitting on something. It's okay if it kinda hangs out a little bit like that, but it has to rest on something. It cannot be completely floating there. It cannot be resting only by a corner. So there's that. We have game tiles representing special abilities. Each player starts with this one. During the game, when you use one of those special abilities, you exhaust the tile, and then you may be able to use advantages that will give you new tiles to add to your pool, and also to refresh tiles that you had already used. These actions can be very powerful, so it's very important that you collect a nice pool of these tiles and use them at the right time. Then right there we had the place where we pick up our resources. So we place a deck of cards there. These cards simply represent different colors of the different materials that the players will use during the game. And I definitely need to shuffle it because I see that since I recently played the game, the cards are still sort of like in sets in here. You place 7 of them randomly face up around the board, and then each player will start with a hand of cards. The number changes based on whether you're the first player or not. So you start with a hand of cards, and during your turn you must do one or two things. One is you take 2 cards from this display here and you add them to your hand. Those 2 cards must be adjacent to one another. So I could take these 2, or these 2, or those 2, etc, etc, etc. Let me see what I have. You know what? I'm gonna take these 2. And as soon as you take them, you replenish the display so that 7 are always available. Other players do other stuff, and then next time I take more cards, etc, etc, etc. The maximum hand size is 7. When I reach or exceed that, I need to discard cards until I am down to 7. So that's one of the things that you can do. Get 2 cards, add them to your hand, discard if you are above the maximum. But that's not what you want to do. The main thing, the reason why you're doing that, of course, is then you can build parts of your facade. So instead of collecting cards, you can spend cards from your hand to build a facade. That is to acquire a game piece and to place it on your board. You discard any number of cards of a certain color, of the same color, and you acquire a game piece of the same color, and that has a number of squares equal to the number of cards you're discarding. I'm discarding for red, then I can get this game piece here. I'm discarding 3 blue, then I can get this one here, for example. And when you place it, as I said, you had to place them so that they're resting on something. They're not just looking completely silly, although they can look a little bit silly. What you're trying to do is, well, first to cover those coat of arms. Every time that you cover one, you'll get a benefit. Also, when you complete a line, one of these lines that you see here, that are emphasized and they have a coat of arms on the side, when you complete one of those rows, you also gain a coat of arms advantage. So I will gain one for that one, etc., etc. The advantage is every time I get one, I can choose to either take one of these things, the one square pieces, and place it on the board, or acquire a new special tile for my collection, or unexhaust all of the exhausted action tiles that I have here. How you score points is each time that you complete a row, it's worth 1 victory point if it contains only bricks or a mix of bricks and windows, 2 victory points if it's only windows. You also score points when you complete an entire column, and that is worth 2 victory points if it's only brick or a mix of brick and windows, and 4 victory points if it's a column made only windows. As you can see, I am already cleverly trying to get that in 2 different places. The game continues until a player has reached 12 victory points, in which case the player wins. Otherwise, you go through the deck entirely once or twice, depending on the number of players, and at that point, if no one has reached 12, then the player with the highest score is the winner of the game. There's a general idea. As for these tiles, the one that everybody starts with, when you use it, it allows you to take 2 cards that are not adjacent to one another in the display. Remember the display? That's what we're talking about. This one here allows you to use cards of one color as if they were of another color when you're building. So, for example, in this case, I could decide to have a 4 blue, to play these cards as 4 blue cards or 4 red cards if I exhaust that tile. This one gives me a discount, -1 card when I'm building. This one allows me to both collect cards and build in the same turn. Usually it's either or. And this one allows me to take an extra card from the display. Speaking of discounts, I just remember an important thing, which is really important. When you're building, if the game piece that you're building is adjacent to a piece of the same color, you get a discount of 1. So if I'm placing this one here, great, I get the coat of arm, I need 4 blue cards, but if I put it here adjacent to another blue, then I only need 3 blue cards to build that 4-1 there. This piece is very attractive, it's the only straight 5 square pieces. If you acquire it, boom, you have immediately a single line already filled up. Maybe you also get a coat of arms advantage, but of course you're blocking your own thing and making it harder for you later to exploit adjacencies to keep building using discounts. And so, this is how you play Copenhagen. I like Copenhagen, and I wasn't sure that I would at the beginning. When first I read the rulebook at Gen Con and I was planning to play with Joel, we were happy that the rules were so simple so we could play right away, but we were afraid that the game was going to be too easy, too simple, too straightforward, what's the point kind of thing. The game turned out to be a lot more interesting than we expected. Then I came home and I played the game with my daughters that are 7 and 9, and they both understood the game, no problem with the rules, and they also enjoyed it, and I enjoy playing the game with them. So it is one of these simple, straightforward, pretty basic rule-wise games that you can play with kids, you can play with gamers, and to me it works. To me it's really a good intergenerational experience. Yes, the rules are so simple, no problem whatsoever, teaching players that you can pick up cards or play cards and take a Tetris piece and put it on the board. Think of them as vertically so the pieces don't float in midair, and that's pretty much the game. And yet, there are interesting twists here and there, such as the tiles. The special action tiles, they may not seem like much, but they really add to the enjoyment of the game. Figuring out which ones you want to get next and when to use them and when to recharge them, so to speak. That is fun stuff, especially when then you consider the possibility of chaining off some of these, so that I'm gonna complete a coat of arms. As a reward, I take one square tile, which I use to complete another line or cover another coat of arms. That gives me another advantage, which I use to refresh my tiles, and I use one, etc., etc. But when you do so, the good thing is that the game doesn't feel like it's stopping as a player is taking multiple actions, because the pace of the game is already so fast that even if a player takes enough actions, let's say that would be 3 or 4 turns in a row, the player maybe has spent 30 seconds. When players are picking up their cards, they're looking at the board and they get a good sense of the cards that they want and a good sense of the pieces they want to place, their turn really just lasts a couple of seconds. It's quite literally the time to pick up the cards and draw new cards, and that's it. And that was your turn, and the other player takes their turn. So even if you take 3 times as much, you're not gonna halt the game. The fast pace of the game to me really is one of the selling points, and I like that because it's super fast, but I still have decisions to make. What do I want to score? If I want to commit to a certain line, to a certain row, a certain column that will score a ton, but may be difficult to pull off just right now. So, for such a simple game, to me, there are remarkable elements of strategy that emerge and that make the game very, very pleasant. The components are great, especially in the Deluxe Edition, but I remember Gen Con I played with the basic version, which definitely was simple enough. And again, you'd be surprised by how many interesting decisions you have to make about a game that is so simple. It's kind of like Ticket to Ride. Super simple, but enough there to keep you interested. In particular, I find when you play only with 2 players, then you really get a good sense of what the other player is doing, and then there can be a little more of a confrontational element. That is, as you are pushing your objectives, maybe you're also removing cards from there. Then the opponent wants, I guess actually with multiple players you can do a little bit of a ganging up against the leader, but it doesn't feel too confrontational because ultimately the game is so abstract and colorful that there shouldn't be emotions that are too intense running high in your group. But there's still that element of interaction that makes the game different from a multiplayer solo. Especially is interesting if I'm taking cards that I know you want, although the color may not be interesting for me right now, but then I use the tile that lets me use one color for another, and then I'm taking those cards that you want and still using them as something that I need. That's a nice little combo, one of the many little combos that you can come up with. Again, nothing complex, but everything intuitive and pleasant. So Copenhagen, I find it to be an entertaining, fun game. I think it's gonna be one of those games that will enter my, what I call the second game of the night rotation. That is usually a game night we play maybe one short filler, then one big game, and after that we want to play something, and then we play something that is a little simpler, a little easier to teach. I guess that if you count the filler, that's the third game of the night. Interesting. Never thought about that. Still, I think this is a game that is going to see some considerable time on the table, if nothing else, because I can play it with pretty much anybody, and that makes it a very flexible game.